Okay, well, a very good morning to Future Cities Forum 9, called Intelligent Cities. And in a minute, we're very pleased to have the London Mayor's Chief Digital Officer, Theo Blackwell, who's going to talk to us about data-driven cities. But Matthew, this is my co-producer here. What else are we talking about today?
And we're also going to be talking about, in the second panel of the morning, after we've had Martin Chase from Stanhope talking about the refurbishment of Television Centre, we're going to be looking at putting housing where the jobs are on a panel. And then after that, we're going to be looking at the creation of urban knowledge hubs, which is very important for the economy.
We're a paperless conference this morning, so your running order is on your phone, which will connect you to our Future Cities Forum blog, and also welcome to our international and audience around the UK. We've got some councils here today and councils watching, so lots of questions for you, Theo, on how the programme that you're running is going to be maybe helpful to councils around the UK. So shall we get going? Theo, do you want to start? Yep. And then you're going to join our panel afterwards.
I think your slides are about ready.
Yeah. Is there a clicker?
Just coming up. Let's move along.
Loader.
I think that's,
yeah, that's the one.
That's the one.
Clicker.
Is there a clicker, or are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're going to do.
Great.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name's Theo Blackwell. Thanks. Cheers, Sean. Cheers. Thanks. My name's Theo Blackwell. I'm London's first Chief Digital Officer. By way of background, I spent 15 years as a councillor in Camden. And latterly, I was Cabinet Member for Finance, Technology and Growth, where we did a lot of work on King's Cross. Saw the growth of the digital economy in Holborn and Camden Town, and obviously at the same time as London's digital economy growing very significantly. And in my day job, I also worked in the video games industry, which was also going through a transformation on data. Mobile phone gaming, for example, in the free-to-play model, essentially thrives upon data in order to find those customers who are willing to pay for the gems and the skins and things like that, if you're a gamer. And also just the playing experience of people who are online. If you take a game like FIFA, where you constantly think about how people are playing with a particular player and whether it's overpowered and the enjoyment levels, that data is actually a fundamental part of their experience. And made me think about the application of data to public services, how we increase satisfaction, how we plan budgets. And data revolution was also going through at the same time in Camden. We managed to do quite a lot of outcomes-based budgeting, which made the organisation have a real thirst for data. So we've put together a Smarter London Together roadmap. It's a new roadmap for London as a smarter city. It's not a strategy, but it's something that sits behind the 7 major strategies for the Mayor of London. Those major strategies allow the Mayor of London to essentially wire money towards the things that he's elected to do. But what's the role of data and smart within all of this? And that's something that my role is to consider. And first of all, we'd say we live in a new data policy setting, which has grown over the last 2 or 3 years. We didn't really think about data and smart in a kind of national way, I think, until a couple of years ago. We have the industrial strategy, digital charter from the government looking at ethics. In London and across the country, of course, we've got an amazing institutional basis for this for our big universities. We've got catapults funded by the government, Nesta, Open Data Institute, to name but a few, and the biggest tech for good community in Europe, and peer networks sprouting up all over the place. So we have kind of like quite a really solid basis for the exploration of data for civic benefit. The one thing I'd say is lacking and we need to address is what happens at a municipal level. And municipal level is really, really important because, of course, that's where most of the data about the delivery of public services is actually gathered. And it gives us the potential to change things. Cities, all local authorities, are essentially agglomerations of data over time. That's what they do. And the typical municipal authority has about 650 lines of business. Each of those have been supported by a piece of technology or a service that they've bought or procured or made over the last 10 or 15 years. And if you think behind that, you kind of go, well, that's quite a lot of data that's being gathered here, but we don't really know, we don't have full knowledge of that technology estate, whether that data is computable, which is really important as we move towards cloud computing power, even what their vulnerabilities are, the interoperability of all of those systems. These are the big data governance challenges that I think are facing public services. And my role down this side is to provide leadership. So across all of those big 7 strategies that the Mayor has, to have a shared view of what we mean by data and smart and digital. To foster collaboration, I think London, with its 33 boroughs, 32 of them with an average population of 250,000, so cities in their own right. Croydon is the same size as New Orleans, if you can imagine that. We've got many, many different public assets, hospitals, schools, council buildings, lampposts, roads. We don't really, the structure of UK local government in the digital age means that sometimes we don't get the real benefits of scale that come with a city. We know that scale works because TfL is an immensely successful organisation. I was over in Bulgaria last week at a conference, a Smart Cities conference, and the deputy mayor of Sofia grabbed the microphone and pledged his audience that one day Sofia will have a ticketing system like London's. So, but TfL is a body that's managed to get that benefit of scale. Contactless payment, what he was talking about, essentially, TfL popularised for the world and is an immense innovator in its own right. But boroughs themselves coming together with data, we haven't quite managed that yet. And that means that the third part of my job is around innovation. With data, we can forge partnerships, we can make things ourselves, and we can innovate. All those things come together in a Smart London Grand Challenge, which we've put together and launched in our roadmap in 2 weeks ago. And that has 5 foundations for future innovation, how we become a smarter city. And I'm going to talk about one of them today, a new deal for city data, but user design services, world-class connectivity, how we bring together boroughs to make the installation of full fibre cheaper, access to rooftops, use our assets like the hundreds of thousands of lampposts that we have across the city, kind of ducting in the sky, if you like, that we can put 5G, air sensors, security, etc. In the future, how we invest in digital leadership and skills, and how we improve citywide collaboration. But data is a really, really important part of this. And mission 2 here, these are all missions to make us a smarter city, create the foundations for a smarter city, is to strike a new deal for city data. And we will look at how we enhance cybersecurity as part of the Mayoral Manifesto. We have to discuss data rights and accountability, and we have to support an open ecosystem to get the benefits of the work we've done so far as a world leader in open data. We need to foster that community more. But the London Office for Data Analytics is, I think, a fundamental programme for us to do this. It's about data sharing. And the programme aims is from City Hall, it's £365,000 investment to test the policy impact of data science, show that data sharing is possible and has tangible benefits. Those that know this. There are many, many public authorities that still have a more conservative interpretation of data. So we need to build that coalition of the willing. We can develop better data sharing protocols citywide, identify barriers to collaborative working, and contribute to a concept of city data. And the Office of Data Analytics, which we've just set up and launched, is a hub for development and the implementation of data science projects aimed at addressing public services and urban civic challenges, which are better tackled together. Boroughs can't tackle air quality alone. boroughs can't tackle knife crime alone. And it has 4 aspects: information governance, technical, project development, and data science. The first thing we've done is set up something, well, we've adopted what works. And this, the Information Sharing Gateway, was developed in the Northwest. It's a working catalogue of data sharing agreements. This was set up in the Northwest, in Cumbria and Lancashire, by an NHS trust and a couple of councils. It's commonly used in that area of the country. Instead of inventing something, we've taken what works. So what that is for a given data set, you'll probably find an agreement of someone who's shared data like yours with someone else. And so people can say, they've done it elsewhere, we can do it here. So it's an easy way of creating that can-do attitude. It creates high-level agreements between organisations. It creates a structure whereby information sharing can be signed off. It allows for delegated authority. And we have bought 100 initial licenses for London to ensure that there's no barrier, not even a cost barrier for local authorities to data share. And it is, of course, ICO compliant and, you know, insofar as the GDPR is rolling out, GDPR compliant as well. Because there never can be, feasibly, one big data lake for London, what we've created is something which is sort of a web, an information sharing web between all of these agencies. And that misses a box about the NHS, and we'll include the NHS in that as well. And that allows the collaboration and the basis of collaboration between all of these bodies. The principles by which we develop it are open source, cloud-based, open APIs. So in line with the principles that have led the world already, with the London Data Store, which has 665 data sets already in the open, and the unified API at TfL. So really, really open, really flexible potential for this. And this allows us to go from where we use data at the moment, which is descriptive and exploratory, and push down this line to look at areas that are quite hard for us at the moment. Predictive use of data, which enables us to budget and plan better. And this is incredibly important to us as London, because the city will grow by 2 million people in the next 20 years. And how we plan transport systems, how we plan public services around that, those and with, you know, tighter budgets. I think Brexit budgets will sort of replace austerity ones. So we will have to think about the interventions that stops human misery and harm arising, rather than dealing with problems at the acute stage, which we often do now. So we're bringing all of these bodies together. This allows us to look at service improvement, better decision and policy making, experimentation. The long list will be drawn up by a group of people that we've brought together from all of these agencies. We'll develop a short list and use cases that enable us to develop these over the next 18 months in the first real pan-London exercise of this kind. As I say, we've got a project development board. We've appointed a information governance officer jointly with the Fire Brigade, which is interested in this pan-London learning too, co-funder. And it will use the London Data Store, which is one of the leading open data platforms, to increase the resources that are also open to civil society to come and help us. This fits in to the Smarter London Together plan in this column here. You can see our progress because we're publishing progress for our roadmap towards a smarter city, which includes all those headings: the user design services, New Deal for city data, connectivity, leadership and collaboration. This is online. You'll be able to see our progress updated each month. And we think that's important because digital transformation is so fundamental to this city, it can't be locked in a PDF or some slides. It's a living thing. Also, we'll get things wrong. We'll change things. We're going to work in an agile way. We'll show people. We'll tell the story along the way because this is not a precise science. This is just a new approach to the city and how we transform it. So you can follow me on Twitter, and also we write up what we do, controversially, according to some of the people at City Hall Communications on Medium. So we've got a series of posts. There's a really interesting one about how we have worked on the London Development Database to get all the data together from the boroughs, and looked at the legacy systems behind that, and what prevents greater and swifter data sharing around planning, which is really core business for City Hall. So please follow us on that platform. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Theo, do you want to come sit down, and we'll get our other panel members. Simon, do you want to come up? Matthew, if you stay here.
Is Prima here? Yes.
Okay, and Prima, if you could come up too. Because I think what we'll do is we'll ask a few questions and then bring in the audience. Fascinating talk. And
I've still got this actually.
fascinating talk, Theo. And I've got a lot of questions, but I want to bring in all the panel members. Theo, obviously we've got a lot of councils who are part of our forum, both in the UK, and we're connected abroad with local authorities. And I know that you are very keen to share this amazing example across boroughs. How is that actually going to work, the collaboration?
Well, Loader was based on a pilot project from Nesta. So we've already worked with a bunch of boroughs on that. We're also going to, as the fifth column of, or the fifth mission from our Smarter London Together strategy, is to improve the collaborative function within the city. Because at the moment there's a divide between, the responsibilities of City Hall and the individual responsibilities to the people of boroughs. And we think by bringing people together, by sort of co-funding a small unit to enable the promotion of common standards, the development of use cases, celebrate innovation that's happening at local authority level that nobody really talks about, we can bring together people in a kind of movement for London to change things. So we're currently exploring another office called the London Office for Technology and Innovation. Pretty soon we'll rebrand all of these things, but that's the function that for the first time will allow the coalition of the willing. It's a new approach. It'll allow the coalition of the willing and the able to charge ahead with their innovation together, rather than kind of more traditional means that we've tried in London before, not ruling them out, but just saying that we seem to have either been, ad hoc coalitions or clunky shared services, or joint procurements. There hasn't been something that is in between. And I think there's quite a lot that can be done through looser, more flexible arrangements between local authorities who are already committed to, who've committed themselves to do things.
And I'm going to ask you the nasty question straight up, Theo, about privacy. Who owns all this data? Are we being treated fairly? And what about possible cyber attacks?
Well, GDPR is actually a really, really important opportunity here, because GDPR, are sort of quite, tough new rules which organisations have had to respond to, and we'll see how it pans out. But I think that's the opportunity to provide, an element of trust within civic life, and how people go about their jobs. It's really, really important that those people who are using data essentially make the case for its use and use it and make the case transparently to people. I think citizens, and our research shows at City Hall that citizens are willing for that trade-off as long as they know what it's used for. At the moment, we're trialling use of anonymised mobile data, which I think mobile data is going to be like, this is the big thing, because it enables us to know how people move around the city in sort of cohorts and anonymously. We're trialling use of mobile data on buses. It's a 3-month pilot. We're currently in that because we know when people get on buses through their Oyster cards, but we don't know when they go off. So that simple analysis will enable us to increase the frequency of certain bus rides and and plan better for the city. So those are really, really important important things. I think Facebook has been Cambridge Analytica was quite damaging, but people's trust in those organisations was already really quite low. Their trust in public services is a lot higher, and the trust in NHS is really high in the use of that data. So I think we've got an opportunity to put the case for civic use of data.
And can I just test out with you, Theo, how democratic this all is? Because I was reading in The Guardian about an example in Barcelona where residents started to gather their own data and the local authorities didn't necessarily trust them to gather it properly. Are you looking for that interaction with different communities?
And Barcelona is really interesting because they've kind of gone on a really radical move towards open source and open data. I think London has probably not told the story about how it leads in open data and what we need to do. And I think also we haven't invested enough in the open ecosystem that allows you to get the most civic benefit from that open data. We've got 765 open data sets in the London Data Store, got 80 live data streams, and yet, it seems to me sometimes with sort of TfL's data, we're great at creating, 80 different parking apps, but less so in identifying all of the underground stations that are, wheelchair and pram friendly. So, it's sort of like open data culture sometimes has moved towards, sort of followed the money rather than the wider civic benefit. And I think it's incumbent on all of those who work in data to have more social responsibility and see how we can create that bigger open culture.
And we're looking later at mixed communities and how we plan our housing. And I'm just wondering whether at the moment we're so fascinated by data that we're actually not asking the right questions or carrying out the right research projects, because I know that some have looked at how we make a more mixed community of a wealthy area, and you look at income and the size of house and everything, number of trees, and then you find out at the end of the research that actually those rich people who can afford to live amongst trees and big houses, that just stays the same. So is it actually, where are we going with this? Are we asking important questions?
I think, as I say, that we need to be clear about our objectives, and we've got, 7 very, very strong objectives in the mayoral strategies. I think the concerns of Londoners around crime, around air quality, are ones that I really think we can address. Particularly, air quality. I mentioned the lampposts at the start, which is sort of like, might seem like the humble lamppost, but a 6-borough procurement of new lampposts with that space for 5G, air quality sensors, electric vehicle charging posts. 6 boroughs alone is 120,000 lampposts. We've got 17 boroughs interested in this. So we can actually change over the next few years. I think what's really interesting about sort of data for good is that we'll have more and more discussions with mobile phone companies about the use of their data. We will also have more sensors. This by its own nature will evolve also in private sector development as well. So how this all fits together is like a big question, because the benefits to the city are really, really good. That's why in the draft London plan, one of the proposals I've put forward is that we have common standards for embedded technology, guidance around common standards. We can debate which ones you adopt in all new developments. So we don't have a cacophony of technological innovation, but we can have a discussion about the standards that we set, which also provide a platform for future innovation.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Simon Dixon here, partner and head of transport at Deloitte, because Simon, I just want to, I know you're aware of cities abroad and mainly you work in London, but how are we doing? Potentially London is always seen, particularly in intelligent mobility, as being behind. What's your impression of Theo's vision and how we're doing?
Thank you. I actually think London is pretty good. As you probably know, we've published the Deloitte City Mobility Index, and we've been comparing and contrasting cities around the world. I think London stands out very well, and is, as your point about Sphere is, world leaders, people want to copy what TfL are doing and get out there. I think there's interesting things that London can learn There's the around buses. And traditionally buses have gone up a route along, and it's been specified that it's this type of bus. Sydney, for example, are trialling output-based contract for buses. So they're saying you need to move a certain number of people in a certain area, and how you choose to do that, whether it's a short hopper bus, a double-decker, and routes. That's quite an interesting thing to change. I think TfL are pretty good around land value capture or getting money out of its transit development. I mean, I think MTR Hong Kong are probably the world leaders. I mean, the joke is that they're a property development company that runs a railway. But, I think if you think about some of the things that TfL are doing in London about maximising retail space at the stations, developments, overstation developments, the money that has been generated around Crossrail, I think that's a good. I think City of Toronto, Metrolink, they haven't done it, but they're thinking. They have very large car parks around their regional rail centres, very large, so that they almost get road rage in the car parks and congestion in the car parks. But they're wondering about, can they take a bit of space out of the car parks, turn them into nice hubs where you can have online deliveries, medical, showers, you can secure bike storage, which will encourage more people to actually get in, develop some income, and have a more seamless integrated transport system. So there are two examples where I think other cities are doing some interesting things. But I would say, because I live here, I love London, and I think we're really, and thanks to what's been done in City Hall and TfL, ahead of the game in a lot of areas.
So Simon, can I just ask you, are we managing our approach to transport through London intelligently? Because we're all very excited about electric vehicles, but I was talking to someone the other day who's saying actually it's a very bad idea, because then people will be not so keen to use public transport, and the social equity in this will be lost.
I hadn't really thought about it in that way. I think what is trying to be done is a sort of seamless integrated mobility in which there's a role for electric vehicles, there's a role for active transport, walking and cycling, there's a role for mass transit. And I think that the trick is getting it right. You're never going to probably be able to afford in cities to have a hugely dense mass transit system right out to the outer suburbs. So you have the role of, cars, buses, shared buses, shuttle buses. I think the electric vehicles is interesting. It's just a technology, it's a propulsion system, it's a much cleaner one, whether, in other cities, other countries are looking at hydrogen as well as the battery electric. But I think it's the interesting thing is if we move to more shared, and you can see that already, and then as autonomy potentially comes in, the move to shared autonomy, I think that really will provide real benefits, and actually it will break down some of the social inclusion. A good example is Columbus, Ohio, which won the US Smart City Challenge. One of their original pilots is seeing how intelligent mobility and shared mobility can help improve infant mortality rates, because way too many mothers are not getting, because they can't get to the hospitals and the clinics before and after the birth, and because they just can't get around. So I think actually better access to transport, more shared, the electric component of it, because it's healthier, can actually improve our cities.
And
I'm an optimist.
Okay, good. And not that I want to be absolutely terrified, but can you tell me a little bit about cyber and your future vision? Are we going to be safe?
Well, I think that Theo and colleagues in other cities around the world is going to help make us safer. I think we've learned a lot more. I think originally it was a case of just throwing stuff out and connecting it in the benevolent way. I think unfortunately we've learned a few lessons, and I think that the people who are planning, the data hubs, they are thinking about cyber from the start. So again, I think you can't be 100% certain, but I think that the lessons that have been learnt, and hard learnt in some cases, have been applied to the future strategies that we heard about from Theo. And I'm aware of other cities doing the same thing. So I do feel confident that we will get the benefit out of it. Yes, we always need to be vigilant, but I do think it's not going to be this sort of nightmare scenario. I'm crossing my fingers. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think the on cyber, there are two aspects to it. I mean, I think one is obviously preventing it happening in the first place, and that's also like a citizen public health issue. Educating people on the right things to do, not to click on links, etc., etc. It's really, really important for public services. I think it's a growth sector in London, and one of the challenges we have in London, so especially sort of got campuses like this, we've got here east, is that we've got some really, really good firms who've developed over the last 2 years or 18 months, and I want to get them involved in protecting public services and giving them their first contracts, but SMEs just starting off, and procurement in the public sector has historically, been like oil and water, and especially on things that are perceived to be higher risk. And so we face a particular challenge of trying to get the innovation that is happening from people essentially, left the intelligence service and started up a really good cybersecurity firm into protecting our public services. And that's a particular thing that I want to look at.
Okay, great. And moving on to Prima. Prima, do you want to just introduce yourself to our physical and web stream audience and just tell me about the amazing journey that you've come along to build Upstream?
It's a very early journey, I dare say. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Prema Gurunathan. I'm one half of the Managing Director for the Partnership for Growth and Innovation, which is a partnership between Imperial College London and Hammersmith and Fulham Council. And our remit is twofold. The first is to turn Hammersmith and Fulham into a leading destination for the tech and creative industries. And the second bit of it, which is probably more pertinent to this very moment, is to help transform White City into an innovation district. And I think as part of that, we've just started in January. It's a long-term game, and I think if you read any of the literature out there on Innovation City, and the key one is the Brookings Institutions one, and that was in 2014, and they said, oh, it's early days. Well, we're only 4 years on from there. But I think what we are looking at, what we're here to do, is to connect businesses, to attract businesses, and to help businesses grow. And we've got various streams as part of our work, from startup clinics to Gigglebyte, which is our tech and comedy festival, and lots of other things. But that's the primer answer.
So you heard Theo talking there about how important it is to encourage tech firms to move forward with all the sort of things that are going to keep us safe in our society and provide innovation. But how do you go about creating, what are the essential ingredients of creating that sort of environment where people can, feel that they can really push the boundaries for innovation?
Okay, threefold. Wear two hats, actually. I mean, I work for Hammersmith and Fulham Council and Imperial on this, but I also work for a startup. So I have actually dipped my finger into that particular water. And I think what's very important for startups is, yes, we want to be an environment where there are a lot of innovative people we can talk to. So you're talking about clusters, you're talking about co-location. And certainly for college, the offer is very much about co-location. Come and be next to, the brightest academics and researchers in the world. They've got 700 of their geeks moving in this summer, and from the chemistry department into the biomedical hub, which is opening in September. And so I think for startups, what's important, we like being near bright people. You like being cheap space. That's not always possible. And I think, for the council in particular, any of you who are developers in the audience will be aware that there's an increasing strand of their work, which is affordable workspace, and how it's, built into bigger buildings as well as part of the fabric of, the environment we are in. It's worth noting, for instance, in the last year we've had 4 of the major co-working companies pop up in the borough. Not every one of them is strictly affordable, but there is at least an element of flexibility, which is very important to startups as well, who want to grow and who may have money and who can grow from 10 to 50, and they have money to do a nice office. So it's the flexibility that matters to them. And the other thing is, I did a piece of work some time, but 2 years ago, going around talking to startups in this borough, and saying, well, what do you like about being here? What do you not like about being here? What would make you stay and what would make you leave? And it all came down to, well, the location's excellent. Anything else? Excellent transport. And it was a case of, okay, right, there's a bit of an education piece showing them the great things that are here, but also the point which came through particularly from people who are running really good early startups, 30 people, which now 70 actually. And this guy said to me, my staff don't really want to trek into Soho, into King's Cross, and God forbid, all the way into Shoreditch when they really want to see somebody interesting. So could we have interesting things on our doorstep, which are social, which are educational? And that's one of the things that Upstream is doing, which is knitting together this community of like-minded individuals in the tech and creative industries. So it's drinks meetups, fun stuff, educational stuff, and all that's part of what we're doing. And I think that's what brings startups. So it's the innovation piece, there's a space piece, and there's a community piece.
And it certainly feels like it's becoming a very powerful campus. And it's not a campus maybe like other science centres that is out of the city. It's very connected, as you say. It's right in the middle and with fantastic transport. But we are sitting here in the studio at White City Place at the Westworks, which is beautiful. But nobody can really understand what it looks like outside. I mean, is there anything about the design, the physical design of the place, that is really contributing to making this hub very successful already?
I think we're doing well, and I dare say we still have some way to go. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But I also think it's a case of bringing the key players together to discuss how they are going to work together, to knit the physical spaces together. So how do you get from here to just across the road, which, by the way, isn't that fun or that easy? And so there are things we can pick up on, along with the bigger question of, how do we perhaps create a community of the larger companies and the smaller companies and how they work together.
And community is very important, isn't it? Because
I was going to jump in. Yes. So I think, yes, a community point is very important. I think particularly for college, I mean, when I took on this job, they're like, this is the long-term game. I was like, okay, this is long-term. Okay, yes, okay, so this is long-term. This has been drilled into me. We're here for the long-term. We're here to create those relationships. And I think the other part of it is, in 10 years' time, and we do not want to be looking at having created Grenfell Mark II. We want to have a real relationship with the people who live in White City, in the estates. And, I mean, this is part of college's outreach, and I know some of the companies here do it very well as well. So Net-a-Porter, for instance, on weekends they bring young people into their offices to run coding programs, your coding classes. So there's some great stuff going on. But we're just at the start of a journey, and hopefully whatever we're doing, we could be doing more and better.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention that the design of the offices here, beautiful open spaces that sort of take my breath away, and beautiful planting and trees, and it is that sense that actually you might just bump into somebody and have a chance encounter.
Indeed.
And that one idea might just be gold.
Yeah.
And we're going to hear later from Mitsui Fudosan about that.
Yes.
And while we sort of maybe take a couple of questions, I'm just going to invite Martin Chase from Stanhope, who's one of the developers responsible for this area, and also the redevelopment of Television Centre, which is now a hotel and flats, to come up to the podium and get ready. Just while we, Martin, if you can, just get ready, while we just take a couple of questions. And I might, Matthew, have you got, just borrow a microphone here, and run off to Brent in the middle over there, because I was chatting to Brent Council before this, and I want to know whether I've actually managed to get his questions about collaboration and data answered effectively. Do you want to just go over to Brent Council there?
All right, well, yeah, I think you did cover it pretty well. I was very interested to hear Theo's presentation. I think moving forward, the partnerships with the private sector, I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that, and also what can be done in terms of exploiting GLA and TfL assets to improve rollout of infrastructure for Digital City.
Well, yeah, the first thing I'd say is getting TfL, Met Police, boroughs around the table on our big lamppost project. As I say, it sort of seems a bit sort of, from the outside, it's just a lamppost, but actually these are the infrastructure of the future right down our streets. Also, I think on a borough level, we're under quite a lot of, I know from coming from Camden, we were under quite a lot of pressure to give assent to loads and loads of street advertising that also had other utility like Wi-Fi and this, that, and the other. And you know, the question is, will we have to do that in the future when we can use our own lampposts for things? And we don't need to get into those kind of discussions. Permitted development rights aside. So I think the GLA has now totally raised its game on connectivity. We've got a connectivity team that brings together boroughs. The use of TfL tunnels to put full fibre down. We brought 8 boroughs together for the first time to win an £8.5 million bid to take the existing dig that we were, well, not dig, I mean, we were putting a pipe down a pre-dug tube tunnel, which is 12 times cheaper than digging up a street. And from the tube stations, identifying public buildings around them in inner London in wave 1 of the DCMS bid, so we could put the fibre from the tube into those public buildings and light up the area around that. That then triggers a discussion with Openreach and other investors about where they're putting in investment to make sure there isn't duplication. And I think what's happened in London is that because connectivity, rather shockingly from sort of previous administrations, has not been seen as a vital utility like electricity, we've had lots of investment in some areas and not enough investment in other areas. Now, it's been enough to support the growth of one of the largest digital economies in a city in the world, but in terms of the future, no. And the second thing I'd say is access to rooftops. The public sector, before we get into 5G and lampposts, the public sector has the tallest buildings and tallest collection of buildings in London. There's no developer that comes anywhere near even one borough's ownership of those buildings. Access to those rooftops and to improve connectivity is really, really important. Can I just come back on one thing, because you mentioned Columbus, Ohio, and I think this is a really, really important point
Just
to make.
very quickly.
Really quickly. I went over to the United States, and people were really, really interested in talking to me about basically the new car, right? I think we'd be failing as a city if we just replaced individual people driving around town in sort of tin cans, whether they're electric or not. We're a European city, and we, unlike Columbus, Ohio, have a mass public transit system. So therefore, we need to think about how we express our need to the smart mobility market, not whether the test of innovation is whether we're open to someone's product that might work for one city and not work for another. Now, Columbus, Ohio, and many US cities under 1.5 million people needs to have smart mobility, because people will remain poor if they can't move out of their area, for the examples that you set up. And that's why it's supported by democratic mayors in those cities. As a European city that has invested masses in mass public transit, we have different needs. And so when someone comes to me and says, I need you, we've got an idea of a smart bus to sort of, ferry bankers around the city, I'm like, well, okay, well, how about Croydon? And if people are less interested in that, then maybe that product is not right for our city. But I think we shouldn't be afraid of expressing our need and trying to make the market in that way.
Okay, thanks, Theo. And I know that we've also got in the audience other councils, Lambeth, Merton, Lewisham. Another question, data or... Yes?
Thanks. Hi, my name's Tasha Finney. I'm from the Royal College of Art. I lead a new program in city design there, and I'm very interested in the question you raised about affordability and the way that we cultivate and constitute innovation environments, because I think if we look at the ones that have sort of more organically emerged, like Soho or like particularly Shoreditch, or we've got many examples globally now, I mean, it always comes about from a kind of spontaneous emergence of clusters of shared interest in spaces that are affordable, that enable us to take risks. But what strikes me around here, from the small amount I know of it and knowing that we're coming here in September with the program, is that affordability is a real issue, right? How do you find spaces here where you can spontaneously meet and take risks, even if it's just evening events that aren't highly managed? So and what strategies are you using to develop that, or how are you dealing with affordability?
Okay, I think you've got 2 questions. Oops.
Sure.
Okay. Habit of shouting. I think you've got I think you're breaking down into two questions. One is really spaces where people can meet easily, and the other part of it is, you know, whether to what extent that's orchestrated or not. And the second part of it is more office space. Is that a fair?
I think they're related because it's an ecology. But yeah, let's.
I'm just going to. Yeah, I'll just break it down. I think I dare say I'm probably able to address part one of that more than part two. And part two, this is very much, you know, I'm only half representing a council, and to what extent they can institute, you know, or ask developers to consider affordable workspace as part of a development package. And, you know, this is clearly a thorny issue because the financials involved on the developer's side. But I think it's also perhaps taking a longer view, which is what do we need to create a vibrant, you know, ecosystem. And it's not just about always putting the people who can pay top dollar in. And I hope what I'm not saying is necessarily anathema to developers. I don't think it always is. So that's part which I can only address a little bit. The other side of it, which is you're talking about communal spaces. I mean, what they are doing here already, you know, as part of the Mitsui Stanhope development and the open spaces and the activities and events they put on, that is a way of bringing people together. And, you know, we kind of piggyback on that. We're very supportive of what we're doing at Upstream. And the other part of it is, you know, we go around the other parts of the borough, be it in White City or further down in Hammersmith, and basically tell people what we're doing. And you get a really good reception. I mean, the co-working companies, for instance, are very good at saying, fine, you know, come along, space is yours, do what you want, and bring the people. And the truth is, you know, that good speaker, free booze equals good attendance. So
well-designed places like King's Cross, for example, are deceptively dense, and you have lots of, you know, there is, I mean, commercial property might be a slightly different question, but certainly the amount of affordable housing that you're allowed to put in there and things like that, because essentially they're sort of 8-10-story buildings that can be fitted into London with big open spaces. And there's quite an interesting piece by Simon Jenkins in the Sunday Politics show, which essentially said that we kind of like basically either build skyscrapers or, you know, 3-story buildings. And
you know, Paris has got quite a dense environment, but yet it's actually quite a nice space to live. And it's thinking about that. I mean, skyscrapers work in Hong Kong, but they don't work. You've got to actually choose what works for London. But, you know, it's the fact that transit hubs are kick-starting cities and economies. You know, if you just think what King's Cross and Temple used to be, Union Station in Denver has transformed, you know, downtown Denver, and has just encouraged people to come in. It's back to someone's point about if you have good transport, links, mass transit, you get people in because it sort of grows and feeds on itself.
Well, one very quick question then over here, because we must get Martin talking very quickly.
Hi, I'm Juliet Seymour. I'm the Planning Policy Manager at Southwark, but I'm also leading on digital for Southwark for Planning. So I've got a question for Theo, a bit of a hard question. Do you think you're being ambitious enough? Because you know that I want to turn the whole way that we provide planning on its head and have just a digital service. And I'm trying to get boroughs to work together, and I've set up a London group to do that. And I just feel that there's not enough ambition, and that, you know, I don't really care how things are at the moment or who's providing them. And I just have an idea that we should give people what they want and make things easy to find and have a completely integrated service that everyone can use. And that I'm just wondering whether you feel that the GLA you're sort of being ambitious enough.
Yeah, so in a couple of months, at the moment we're kind of deciding on the areas that we'll concentrate on, and because planning's core business. Well, planning, grant making and skills are kind of core business for the GLA, so those are the ones that jump out. Planning, we are going to put a lot of effort into, and Hackney Council has also been doing a lot of stuff on service design. We need, in my view, to basically show that we can use much better digital tools to improve consultation and therefore citizen engagement. We need a much better way of just getting to the data. We need to use technology to free up your time so that you can send officers, not to take them away from the desk inputting data into stuff that you've got to give to us or the government, but actually check whether the developers have delivered what they said they would, which, you know, I think there's still some questions about. And I think we can do things like 3D modelling. So when we get to the point of talking to the public about a building, which, let's say, go to West Hampstead and you propose, which has like sort of 5-storey buildings there, and you propose a 10-storey building there, you'll get a lot of people, it's kind of suburban sort of pushback, sort of saying this is a skyscraper. But actually, if you have things like 3D modelling, if you can engage people with what a 10-storey building looks like, it's not the end of the earth. I think this is really, really fundamental. But it's getting greater understanding, and having been on a planning committee for about 8 years, it's a pretty brutal experience for architects, members of the committee, planners, etc. So I think this needs to radically improve, and it's a great area which we can do it. So I hope we can, deliver on your call for ambition.
Great. Well, thank you very much to my panel. The content's been fantastic. And just to let everybody know that we're going to keep this stream up for a few weeks so that people can go back and listen to everything that people have said, because I think it's worth reflecting on it. So thank you so much. Really grateful. So I'm going to say goodbye to you now. And just a round of applause. Okay. And I'm now going to invite Martin Chase from Stanhope to the lectern. And just to say that, Martin, I stayed at Television Centre, now a hotel, and a development of lots of wonderful flats. And it was completely fantastic. Obviously, I worked there when I was working for World Service Television and Kilroy. So couldn't really let you get away without describing what's gone on there.
Thank you. Sean, can we... Oh, that's feeding back on it. Sean, can we have the first picture? No. Thank you, and a very warm welcome to White City, which is you are actually at the heart of one of the largest regeneration projects in London. And I do hope while you're here you'll have an opportunity to have a good walk around. My colleagues here, David Haight, if he just gives us a quick wave, he'll be on the panel later from Mitsui. Nick Constable is here from Stanhope, and they'll be around later, and maybe some others just to sort of send you in the right direction in terms of having a look around the area. But I say it's one of the biggest regeneration projects in London because this is a 10 billion square foot project, and a really huge collaboration between 4 developers and the London Borough, Hammersmith and Fulham, as we've heard, and indeed Transport for London. So we are top left at White City Place. Say a bit more about this. I'm going to talk mainly about Television Centre, home of the BBC as was. We have representatives here from Imperial College. You can see top right, that is a 2 million square feet campus for them and 400 homes. We have Barclays St James's, who are building 1,500 homes. And we have, of course, Westfield, we're London's largest shopping centre now, following the extension, and they're building 1,500 homes. So the whole project is much bigger, for example, than Battersea, and is having an enormous impact, I think, on London over time. And indeed, we are looking forward to our friends from Old Oak to the north getting going with that, and of course the link through HS2. So Heather's asked me to say a little bit about White City and about Television Centre. So a quick context. So this is the home of the 2008 Olympic Games, where GB did extremely well. We won 156 medals and came first, unlike 2012, where we won 65 and came third. But what's interesting is to sort of get a feel as to where you are sitting. So if you see to the north Duquesne Road, Hammersmith Hospital, the Westway runs roughly through the middle of the site. You can see it illustrated there, and you can see Shepherd's Bush to the south. And the stadium itself actually remained until 1985. Latter years it was speedway and greyhound racing. And what was unusual, and I don't know why they've dropped it, was the Franco-British exhibition. We were friends with them in those days. And what it was a trade exhibition with 20 nations came and built this fantastic set of pavilions, wooden pavilions, next door to the Olympic Stadium. And there were 8 million visitors in the 2-week period, to give you an idea of how successful this was. And I don't know why we're not using the Olympics as a sort of trade platform in that way anymore. So part of the site was allocated, as you know, to BBC, Lord Reith, home of British television, and the architect of those days, we still have the envelope, was pondering how to plan this scheme and scribbled this question mark on an envelope, and indeed that was what was created at Television Centre, and I do hope you're going to have a look after this event. If you just explain the diagram, so it essentially was a question mark created around the Helios, 8 television studios, workshops to create the scenery and the painting, and of course the BBC offices for all those famous people. And it was literally the home of British television, opened in 1960, all live TV in those days, so you know, Doctor Who, Fab, Fawlty Towers, Strictly Come Dancing, all came from these 8 television studios over many, many years. And we, Stanhope, in partnership with Mitsui Fudosan and Enco, bought this site off the BBC in 2012, and that is the building that we purchased. And our master plan for the area essentially is what we would say is a reinvention of this fantastic building, which is listed. And you can see some of the major elements. 3 television studios to the left maintained, continue and are operating today. Homes, 450 homes, created in part on the site of the Helios offices, a circular building, and in part by a new building on the site of the 5 television studios that we demolished, and offices in 2 buildings of something of the order of 500,000 square feet. And we still have another office building to create, and we still have another 500 homes that we have to build. So it's a 2 million plus square foot project as essentially the reinvention of a really interesting building, and that is our master plan turned into a 3D format. Queen's Park Rangers fans will notice the stand behind, and that is the building as it is today. And as I say, please go down and have a quick look. So the BBC are there with their 3 TV studios. You often see a queue outside, and those are shared, as is very typical these days, with other producers. So not only is it Graham Norton, it's also Good Morning Britain coming out of there, and Countdown, and a whole range of other shows. And you can see a glimpse of the Helios. This is the original BBC reception, which is the entrance to the apartments, and some of those iconic images that those of you who have been to Television Centre in the past will recognise have all been maintained and celebrated as part of this amazing project. This is the new building created on the site of the old TV studios. You can see the gardens, which are now substantially finished, and actually they face on the outside to the Japanese water garden, which is the last remaining part of the Franco-British exhibition that I mentioned. And some famous characters working for the BBC have enjoyed coming back just to sit outside their office and see how it is now as a luxury apartment for all those who have moved in. And we have sold, 80% so far, and mainly to people who are living there and are really enjoying it. And I was pleased to see that Heather and Matthew had a comfortable night last night. Amenities for residence is a very important part of urban living these days, and so here not only do we have a fantastic residence lounge, but you can invite your mates around for the World Cup this evening and watch the show in our mini cinema, which is available for residents. Big emphasis, of course, on the placemaking, on the catering, so very much more individual retailers. So we have Bluebird Cafe. We even have please go and see Patty and Bun, because that is run by Terry Wogan's 2 sons and is going pretty well. We have Soho House, where Matthew and Heather stayed, which is obviously a big part of our branding, and they do have the most fantastic swimming pool on the roof. I'm sorry we won't be able to get up there, members only, but attached to it is a hotel where they stayed, which gives you access to the club, and they're also running on 25,000 square foot gym in the basement, and part of the sort of whole branding. That's the hotel in the centre on the Helios. I mentioned that it's part of a much wider regeneration project, and to the left, you can see where we are sitting now, which is White City Place. White City Place was the BBC's offices. It's about 850,000 square feet as it stands today, and we have secured planning consent for another 1 million square feet. And you've heard in this morning's panel some of the themes that are emerging from the main building. So you can see left foreground, Royal College of Arts represented here. You can see the Westworks, where we're sitting in, which is the far building, and Media Works, which is more in the foreground, and the buildings at the back of the site are still occupied by the BBC. And we're trying to develop this theme of media and communications. So in this building, for example, we have OneWeb, we have ITV, we have a whole series of television and film producing type companies. Over the road, in Media Works, we have Net-a-Porter, and we have we also have a company called Huckle Tree. We talked about this co-working idea. Please go and have a look, because the Huckle Tree approach to co-working, I would say, is quite unique and pretty wacky, and well worth going to see the feel of that. And of course, creating the ambience here, we talked about the buildings and the quality of the buildings. This essentially is a refurbishment, but actually the floor plates here have worked out particularly well. We'll try and show you some spaces upstairs if we can. But creating the ambience of the place, when you ask people what they want from the office they're going to work in, of course the first thing is about the journey to work, isn't it? You know, critical. Here, fantastic. The second thing they say is, what are we going to do at lunchtime? And it's a very common theme in terms of doing surveys of employees, and we're trying, as you see outside, to create a bit of a mix of offer, a bit of a mix of retail, restaurant outside, so that it is generally a place to be. And what will be really fun is, in the period till we actually start the next phase of this project, King's Cross Theatre are coming to build a temporary theatre here, wooden theatre, which I think will be a real offer as part of the whole project. And those of you who know one of our other projects, Chiswick Park, which website is enjoywork.com. In Chiswick Park, we worked very hard to create a really nice ambience for people, and that's been very well received. Here, we've taken that one stage on, not only in terms of the retail and the restaurant offer in the complex, but also the idea that the offices themselves are also open to the public. So you've got this indoor-outdoor effect. This is Butterscotch, just out here. Anybody can come in and out of this building and into Media Works. And indeed, when you go and see the TV Centre building, which I hope you will, you'll see the office building, which is let to White Company and to Publicis, the advertising agency. Again, you can go in and out of the building freely, and that is part of the concept that we strongly believe in. So, as I say, it is an enormous project in total. Fantastic cooperation between the four key developers. Fantastic support we've had, of course, from our partners, Mitsui and AIMCO. And I hope you'll take the time and a lovely day to have a really decent wander around, and colleagues will be pleased to direct you.
Thank you, Martin. Have we got any questions for Martin at the moment? They'll probably come out later in the panel, actually. And sadly, Martin, you've got to hop off to Cambridge, haven't you?
I've got to hop off to Cambridge. Same theme, Cambridge University.
Okay.
If that's the case, then I've got a question.
How polite.
That was fantastic. It was super interesting seeing all of that. And I actually haven't seen the full development presented like that before, so thank you very much. One of the things we're really interested in at the Royal College of Art is how we develop a different kind of relationship with the neighbouring stakeholders, the neighbouring stakeholders around us, which of course includes quite a number of large housing estates and a region of London that has had a fairly challenged relationship to the benefit that London has seen over the last 10 or 15 years. So I'm wondering if there are any strategies that you've got in place as a broad development for engaging a wider community.
It's vital, isn't it? And the mix is fascinating. I mean, you yourselves have been running your end of year exhibition in here. I don't know, is it still on? Do you know? Is it?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Well, please go for a wander around. There's this most frightening inflatable spider, which is an enormous thing. You must go and see, which is in this building. But more seriously, yes. I mean, there is an issue. So here is one of the original housing estates of London, actually run by the council. So we've had an enormous amount of engagement with them. There's a TA centre here, and what you've got is yes, they call themselves reserves now, forgive me, but there is a TA centre here. We've done a lot of work with them. What we have is a sort of fascinating contrast. If you go this way, you're into Notting Hill, Holland Park, seriously expensive. Think Primrose Hill, double the price. And then you suddenly come into our area and you've got essentially this enormous regeneration project, reinvention of the whole area. And if you go, keep going west, you've got a contrast between some quite difficult areas, and then suddenly you'll get into expensive again in terms of Hammersmith and Chiswick. So actually we're right in the middle of this enormous area, and we have, I mean, the council have been hugely supportive, but we have done our level best to engage with people. But you have to get over a difficult message. Difficult is the wrong word, but a challenging message about what we're creating, which sounds expensive. Expensive offices, expensive homes, expensive environment, expensive shops. What are we doing in terms of London benefiting? We think we're doing an enormous amount for London PLC, but actually presenting that message to the wider community is quite interesting. And we're just starting to engage with the Old Oak Development Corporation to work together. They're coming actually early next week to start that same dialogue, because they've got the same challenges in their area or around their car giant area and all the issues of football. They've got the same community engagement challenges that we have.
Is there any opportunity for sport development in this area at all, or is that too tricky at the moment?
Well, we haven't got any land left.
Right.
That's our difficulty, and therefore there's all this discussion about where the football club is going in terms of Old Oak, and that's all running at the moment. But we are essentially fully developed out, and this is where you have challenges in London in terms of land availability.
You say you're limited in terms of external space, but just outside this development, there's a whole plaza of external space, and I was just wondering whether possibly you've set up communities, theatre, activities for the summer music festivals for the local residents, if there's that in mind at all, or?
I mean, it was referred to earlier. There was a series of roading events here, and when we walk round, we'll tell you what's going on. And clearly, yes, anybody, and we're welcoming anybody in. There's been actually a big debate in the office this week about the lack of signage that I think we need to address, because people don't really realise it is a public space. I think we need to address that up here. Whereas down in Television Centre, they're all wandering in and out, and it's brilliant. It's always busy and buzzy. Yes, I mean, we really hope that you're talking about this area, which essentially is a grass area and a development site. Yeah, we have a continuous run of events, and all the time, and there are brochures around which you're welcome to take. So yes, the answer is yes, and I should have referred to it. This is our next two sites for development. I mentioned we got planning consent for another 1 million square feet, which gives you a degree of confidence we have in the area. But I also mentioned that in the time before we can start that development, we are welcoming the King's Cross Theatre, which I think will be a really good feature for communities.
Okay, excellent. Is that it for the time being? Because I think we probably should thank Martin very much and crack on with our next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a lovely talk. Very interesting. Okay. So while we move the chairs back, can we have our next panel up? So we've got Anne Clements from WIG. And just move these along. Okay, and Matthew. Okay, Anne, would you like to just sit down and hand a microphone? Okay, and who else have we got on this panel, Matthew?
On this panel we have got Tasha Finney from the RCA, Royal College of Art, and we should have Hugh Lewis here. Hugh Lewis is here from Bexley Co.
Thank you.
And
And if you just explain what this panel's about, Matthew.
Yes, I will. We're looking at the regeneration of neighbourhoods, and we're particularly looking at how you put the houses in the right places for the jobs, and that combination. We've had some interesting conversations already about building knowledge hubs and how they will bring jobs to an urban area. So we were interested to talk to Anne Clements, I think, to start with, who's got a lot of experience of planning in London, especially around the Wembley football ground, which you did with Quintain for a long time.
But now working for WIG.
Now working for WYG.
Yes, I was the planning director for Quintain for 15 years, more or less, and achieved the master plans that have regenerated all the land around Wembley Stadium. Wembley in itself is, of course, internationally regarded. We had the opportunity to develop a significant amount of land around there, 85 acres, and there's about 8 million square feet of development currently consented, with 8,000 homes and then other mixed uses. So it is very much a mixed use scheme that was brought, it has accelerated more recently, but has been brought forward since Quintain bought the land in 2002.
But Anne, I wanted to ask you, we're on the edge of a huge housing crisis, aren't we? And we're about to face the biggest house building for 30 years, or since the 1930s, actually. Do you think the government's got the plan right? I know there are a lot of councils out there wondering and having to look to their own laurels to really get things sorted. What's your impression?
I think the planning system in the UK is far too fractured. I think there's too much grey area and opportunity for interpretation. I think we're very fortunate in London insofar as we have the GLA, who sit in that middle ground and set the targets for London, and that provides support for the boroughs as well as a challenge. And it also provides some clarity and a further authority to turn to as a developer if you end up in wallowing around in a mire with the local authority. So, and I think that it's a shame that we don't have that sort of middle tier of planning strategy and delivery across the country, and therefore I think the delivery of housing is really quite hard work.
We had Phil Graham, the Chief Executive of the NIC, at our last forum at City Hall talking, and he was saying that we must join up housing to infrastructure. Yes. I mean, that's very important. Is it going to happen?
I think certainly the more that we have forums of this nature, and we are bringing together the public and private representatives, and you do talk about these things, yes, I think there is an opportunity to do that. Clearly HS2 is going to happen, Crossrail 1 has happened, Crossrail 2 will happen, there's the Bakerloo line in London extension, which is critical and unlocks an awful lot of land. I think the more that we have forums of this nature represented at the highest level by public and private bodies, then yes, I do think there's a chance of delivering that. And in terms of the infrastructure outside of London, the National Infrastructure Commission is critical. We just need to see some power coming forward and the political imperative to deliver the infrastructure that will support development outside of London, and really consider the Greenbelt question and actually facilitate unlocking further brownfield land in our urban hubs. I think that's key, because the jobs are in the urban hubs, London, Birmingham, Manchester.
Do you have any views on the development of sort of the garden villages and garden towns, like across the Cambridge to Oxford corridor, as a solution? Because Phil Graham was talking about, maybe 1 million new homes need to go into that arc, joining up the two.
Yes, I think.
Is that going to be, how is that going to be done?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Clearly the forum today is about data and the ability for people to work from home, therefore less of a call on the transport system. You can work from home, you are connected. I think there are some social issues around that, both in terms of remaining connected to the people that you live with and making sure that the communities that are developed in those areas are properly supporting and encouraging engagement of individuals with other human beings. I think that's quite important. The other part of being able to work from home, though, is positive insofar as people won't need to use our pressured transport systems either with cars or on the train, or perhaps if we have more of an introduction of flexible working, then we can smooth that sort of peak hour rush where everybody gets squished in next to somebody that they really don't know. So I think there are lots of opportunities. I think there is the need for the providing residential accommodation outside of the hubs for all of the benefits that provides, the green space and so on and so forth. But I think that in order to be successful to do that, you have to make sure that you are properly communicating what this means and managing the communities that exist there today.
But Anne, do you really feel that councils outside London are being left a bit on this huge proposal to design well-run communities? Because we've heard about the housing crisis and we've heard about the funding which has been put into it, but nobody's really talked about the definitive plan to create communities rather than dormitories.
Yes, I think that I can't talk very much about outside London. The majority of my planning experience is at Wembley, where the council were very clear in their vision about what they wanted to do with the land around Wembley Stadium. They worked very hard to retain the stadium. There was talk of it going to Birmingham. They kept it. It was the catalyst for the regeneration of the surrounding land, and they have been very much involved and instrumental in creating that relationship with the community. And one of the biggest things that makes Wembley successful is the fact that Brent Council cited its civic centre at the heart of the regeneration area. So whereas the development could have been a huge scheme for new people coming into the area, putting the civic centre at the heart of things brought the existing community into the area. And I think as you develop new areas, you have to make the new space that you create accessible to the people that are already there. And it has to be accessible in terms of genuinely open to them, but affordable in the widest sense. So it's all very well providing cinemas and so on and so forth, but if they're not affordable for the existing council-run housing estates that are on the doorstep, then really they're not accessible to the people that are nearby. So it's an agglomeration of lots of things, and making sure that everybody works together.
Nice.
Perhaps a good opportunity to bring in Hugh and talk a bit about what's happening in Bexley and the challenges you've got there. Are they going to be similar to Wembley? Have you got lots of more space to build?
I think the challenge, well, Bexley
If you could just explain what.
Yeah, so Bexley Co is a development company set up by the London Borough of Bexley. I'm the recently appointed MD, with a vision, the proposition of undertaking direct inward investment. This includes house building as well as commercial development, improving connectivity and infrastructure in the borough. So Bexley is a borough very fortunate in that it's got the longest river frontage of any London borough, which presents an opportunity, challenge and a constraint in some ways. But it also has the benefits of Crossrail coming through. Opening Abbey Wood is opening in December, and the proposition of the extension of Crossrail down to Ebbsfleet with the C2E. And some of you may have seen the John Armitage report that came out on Monday on the Thames Estuary and the growth ambitions and what that could do for not just Bexley but North Kent and the growth opportunity. So Bexley Co has been put in place to take full advantage of that opportunity and to undertake direct intervention and direct development opportunities. So coming back to the housing question, which is kind of the elephant in the room, you have the London plan, which is superimposed based on a very basic formula of how many houses each borough need to take over the next 15, 20 years. My own personal view, I'm not sure that the former formula that they've used is necessarily the right one, and it doesn't necessarily address the needs of each of the individual boroughs. Bexley, if I compare it, is an outer borough versus an inward borough, so it has different dynamics, different demands, and the issue of transport, housing, connectivity, cars is more prevalent, more of an issue in Bexley than perhaps if you're looking at one of the inner London boroughs. That said, there are large swathes of development opportunity in Bexley, land particularly along the river frontage, and a more efficient utilisation of existing employment land. If you think that you've got a lot of car braking, very traditional activities on employment land next to the river, which you could say, if you were being pragmatic about reutilisation of that land in terms of more efficient use. So you've got a car breaker who employs one man and his dog Spot, versus, you relocate them or more efficiently bring in an IT-related company who generates 20 new jobs and then creates perhaps an innovation hub. So those are the challenges and opportunities that Bexley face, and I think there are clear opportunities for redevelopment of housing and improve, and this goes full circle to the question of placemaking and improving and providing sustainable communities in an existing environment. So this is not stripping away everything and starting afresh. This is about building on what you have, looking at the assets that you already have, looking at the communities and the challenges of each individual community. And the communities in Bexley are diverse, and each element of those communities will have different needs and different demands. So it's a question of how you balance that. But I think my view, that Bexley Co will be there to undertake direct intervention and to create new standards of quality in terms of built environment, placemaking, master planning. And I have this sort of simple terminology: do you understand what good looks like? So if we leave it to the marketplace, there's an argument to say that the qualitative element of what we get is mixed, and most of this is commercially driven. Bexley Co is in a slightly different place in that the council has said we only need to achieve a 7% return. So that means that we can undertake direct development on a different basis to commercial developers, and that's not a criticism, that's just an observation, but it does allow us to be more innovative, more creative in terms of our placemaking, particularly around the quality of development of the housing and the community assets that you need to create on the back of existing improved connectivity with Crossrail, and how you generate that into connectivity hubs, improving bus services, metro opportunities, and possibly Sprint. So you put that together, it's quite a toxic, challenging mix.
But Hugh, investment's very important, isn't it? Inward investment. What are you looking for, and how are you going to use it?
So two parts. One, the positives are that Bexley Council are transferring land assets into Bexley Co. So we're getting our hands, if you like, onto a large land bank. The council has already put potential borrowing into the company of 120 million to kickstart the process. The published plan, which is in the public domain, has an aspiration of a further investment of £500 million over the next 10 to 15 years. So there are opportunities of growth. So we're looking at the Erith Centre redevelopment, the town centre, Slade Green. Those are substantial development opportunities that will take more than tens of millions, probably between 50 and 100 million, possibly more, and looking for a joint venture partner, inward investment partner to be participant in supporting that proposition, I think is part of the day job of presenting that proposition in terms of what's the opportunity, what's the investable ask, and then what does that do in terms of return, sustainability and deliverability. So this is a here and now conversation, but I see that coming back to the market probably later in the fall, certainly around MIPIM UK, and certainly doing a major launch in MIPIM next year about the proposition of investable propositions in the borough around some of these key development opportunities that will need large-scale inward investment support from external partners.
And what about the education mix? There's talk about the Institute of Making.
Absolutely.
Bexley, which is a very interesting idea.
Well,
can you explain a bit about that?
It's more than an idea, it's progressing. We had a meeting with the Deputy Mayor, and this is about creating an innovation centre for skills training academy, etc. And that's moving ahead in the context. We've identified a site location for that facility, and it's a question of putting funding together to start that process of developing that opportunity. And we certainly have the tacit support from the Mayor's office about that proposition. It addresses the challenges not just in Bexley but in Greenwich and the surrounding area about job creation, and that's a big challenge with all the development in inward investment that is taking place, will be taking place over the next 15, 20 years, having enough bodies, and I'm excluding or ignoring Brexit in the context of what does that do to your labour force, but the challenge is about creating an innovative training hub to bring forward resources that will support and sustain that redevelopment opportunity. So this is a real opportunity rather than what I call a Mystic Meg conversation in terms of this is a good idea, this is something more tangible, it is moving forward. So the question is not if it will happen, how and when.
And it'll be training people to do what?
A combination, not just in what I call traditional skills of building, but also in terms of, we talked about digital connectivity, digital infrastructure. All of those are work streams that need to be considered and developed and supported and provide sustainable resources to the marketplace.
Because, I mean, developers have said to me, sometimes they will walk away from a town or a city if the education mix isn't right. You know, there isn't enough higher education input.
Absolutely.
As a balance to what's there.
Most developers have a checklist that they work through, and one of them is, you know, political stability, what's the planning regime, what's the availability of land, what's the qualitative element of housing, education, social environment. All of those are key tick points for any developer. So part of the proposition is if you want to seek to provide confidence to the market and to attract inward investment, you need to start answering those questions and providing tangible outputs about how you will deliver outputs that will tick those boxes rather than I've got an idea to fix this. You need something more tangible, more deliverable to do that.
Okay, so shall we bring in Dr. Tasha Finney, who's been sitting there very patiently, because Tasha, you've got a really interesting move into the White City community, haven't you? And integrating with the community. And you've also done a lot of research on cities over the years. I mean, I noticed that you've done some research, I think I've got this right, on Victorian cities. And it would be interesting to hear how Victorians, did they get things right better in terms of community and building than we do, or has it evolved for the better?
Wow, that's a challenging thing to answer. Well, I guess
just hold your microphone a bit closer so people can hear.
Well, I guess
Tasha, just hold
sorry. Okay, so right. So if I take it back into the 19th century and I think of house building, I mean the great reorganisations of London that happened during the second half of the 19th century were all around social reform and the way that we cleared out large areas of the city, places like Bethnal Green and the Arnold Circus and the delivering of housing for the worthy poor. You know, they were the great social reform moves that were made in London during that period, and they created an inheritance of high quality housing now that I think we can see all over the city, and an expectation that we can do the same thing now in terms of affordable housing. But I think what's different now is, of course, our understanding of what housing can do is much more complex. And I think what's been interesting in both of the comments that have just been given now is a sense that we need to be co-locating housing in a more sophisticated way with both production and labour, and that the big transformations that are coming to us, particularly in terms of demographic change, ageing populations, and the need for a different kind of relationship to what some would say is an unproductive workforce, or a different kind of productive workforce, and a different need for intimacy and care in ageing in place, and strategies like this that aren't working very well, that we're leaving populations of people with great crises of isolation and loneliness, coupled with transformations in labour. So that's the other big thing of how we bring different kinds of manufacturing and in light industrial production together with housing. What's interesting now is when we approach these questions of either how we approach something like the Cambridge Arc, and we talk about housing out the garden cities, or we talk about new housing in Bexley, is how we bring together more sophisticated typological responses to that need. And so where we're talking about the garden cities, I'd say, I mean, seriously, are we still talking about cities of that density? No one on this planet has the time for that. So I think we all need to take a really hard look at both the desire that we have for a degree of urbanity, which means that we like to live in density, but with access to all of the amenity of green and open space, and to a kind of urban life together, because we know we're better together, right? Despite the fact that we can live digitally globally, and we all are, and we're Skyping in and Zooming into meetings constantly, we're better together, and we want to be able to have coffee together downstairs while we work upstairs and live upstairs.
Tasha, just explain what's wrong with garden cities.
Oh, I don't think, I think it's an indulgence. I don't think we can afford the density anymore. We just can't afford the density. I mean, that's going to be a controversial statement, and I'm Australian, so I can make it.
You mean you're saying we can't afford the space?
We just can't afford the space. I mean, it's crazy. We can't afford the space.
Right. So should we be designing more mansion blocks?
We need to be building much higher quality housing. We need to demand more of the market in the provision of a higher quality housing, but we can do it in a density that's 5 to 7 stories.
But the English are obsessed by their gardens, aren't they? And
English
often,
need
whether
to
it's
get over
semi-detached or
I mean, it's very
so they
simple,
need to get,
right? The English need to get over that.
They need to get over.
And I think what we need to do is build prototypes and allow people to experience very high quality housing that works differently, because it's possible. I mean, this is ridiculous to say that it's not possible. And it means that we can keep our dogs with us. We can have access to high quality public infrastructure and leisure amenity. We can have beautiful parks and open spaces, but we share them differently and we live slightly differently. But I mean, of course, everyone needs convincing of that, and we need to build the exemplar projects that people can go and experience and see that it's a better way of living.
So are you positive about what's happening in certain parts
Absolutely
of London?
Optimistic. I think we need to bring together a whole lot of different strands of new research to do with the possibility of the way that density can respond to the real scourge of loneliness, right? And the way that we share more space, the different kind of communality that we begin to develop at the scale of the apartment block. The way that the ground works in terms of different kinds of labour opportunities and manufacturing opportunities, the way we make our rooftops work harder in terms of food production, and the role that that plays in developing and cultivating lives together at the scale of the block. All of these things are possible, but we need to start building them, and we need innovative developers that with public interest that can start to experiment and employ the really experimental young practices that are starting to work with this. Because it's not only about the way we live together, it's about the way we're aging together, but it's fundamentally about civil society and the way that we're democratic together and the way that we make decisions together.
So there are elements of behaviour change that need to happen, probably, in people's
But
view, or is that you think it's happening already? That different generations
I think it's happening out on the edge already. You know, I think in the sort of early adopter, avant-garde edges of design, and young people living together, the millennials particularly, are starting to develop the systems for making this happen. And it's particularly strong. We see it in Europe. So in cities like Zurich and Berlin, in Barcelona, we're seeing it with new collectives emerging in Melbourne, in Australia, we're seeing it. And they're particularly strong where you've got designers working with eccentric client groups, so collectives of people coming together, and they can negotiate through the design process how they will share new things together. And so innovations are emerging, like, you know, in a world of blended families where we have children moving between households, so we double our households, right? So we're wondering why we have a housing supply problem, but it's because suddenly we've got double households everywhere. How do we develop at the scale of the apartment block a studio apartment, for example, where X's teenage boy can come and stay? Rather than having a 3-bedroom apartment, you have a 2-bedroom apartment, and it can flex into a shared space that's bookable at the scale of the block. Or smaller kitchens and large shared kitchens that you can book.
Yeah. Hugh, are you listening to Tasha? You're about to go and rip up your plan.
No, not at all. I think a lot of what you've said, I think I would support. I think the proposition, I think my view is that London and some of the major cities, Manchester, Birmingham particularly, have their own unique challenges, and one is availability of land, which drives a proposition about how you deal with the housing agenda in those localities. When you look at the Oxford, Cambridgeshire, they have the luxury of land. So they can indulge in having what I call quasi-garden city concept, and I get that. But where it comes back fundamentally about this proposition about putting housing where jobs are, where people are. And if we look at the London scene, and if I look, insularly at Bexley, there are existing conurbations with existing people living and working locally, and you're not trying to change that, you're trying to support and enhance that. And there are examples, good and bad, about how that's been dealt with. You've got Ebbsfleet, which is a quasi-garden city, and you can almost say it's moving to itself into a dormitory city, and it's just providing accommodation for people working and living in London because they've got very good connection links from Ebbsfleet smack into the city. And that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that, but is that a model that we want to roll out across UK PLC? My view is probably not. And certainly the proposition of coming back with a balanced view about how accommodation works in terms of fostering good placemaking, good communities and interaction, I think is key. So that's certainly the approach that we are taking with Bexley. I mean, one of our sites, we've gone to an RIBA competition to appoint a sort of cutting-edge architect. Hopefully it'll come up with an innovative
Which site
design.
is this?
This is the Felixstowe Road site opposite Abbey Wood Station.
Okay.
So this is about us being innovative, saying, come up with something different that will challenge the status quo, particularly in the fact you're next to a good hub connectivity. So, you know, car parking is an issue that we need to address, resolve. Do we need car parking on the site? Probably not. But it's about what you then do about inclusiveness in terms of both affordable housing on that site as well as, you know, balancing the act of having housing that will attract senior and middle management to businesses to support inward investment and employment. And we shouldn't ignore that element. There is that preoccupation on affordable housing and social housing, but let's not forget we are still looking to try and attract inward investment on employment. So you need a balanced economy vis-a-vis if you're trying to attract businesses to relocate or to expand, then both the working element of that business as well as management need to be considered in the mix. That's my view.
Can I just interact? I want to come back to that question of what's wrong with dormitory suburbs. And, you know, I think it's time to be very clear about this, is that we know that one of the great contributors to some of the health problems and the non-communicable diseases of ageing that are going to drown the NHS. They're going to drown all of us in the oncoming tsunami of healthcare expenses. Are brought on by things like long commuting times to work. It's really simple, right? It's a spatial question. It's a multi-scalar question of the way that the city is performing spatially, and these are the things we need to challenge with urgency, because we can't just put the preventative money into the NHS. We need to put it into the way that we're organising cities.
But also, maybe, do you want to?
I was going to bring Anne in there as just a quick reaction before maybe we have a couple of questions. What do you think about what Tasha and Hugh have been saying in terms of planning our towns and cities?
I do think that Tasha's comments are absolutely correct, and I think that the moves that Bexley are making towards implementing those changes are key. Matthew made the point earlier, does there need to be social change? I think social change is happening anyway, and I think what we need to do is now develop to ensure that we create and maintain communities, because social change is happening through access to data and social media, and the fact that the sort of my children's age are all communicate with each other online. They don't do anything face-to-face anymore. So we do need to provide facilities for that. There needs to be integration of communities and real engagement between local authorities and developers. Local authorities have a much better knowledge of their borough than a developer coming in to build a building. And it's absolutely imperative that local authorities truly understand their borough and are able to share the needs of that borough with a developer that's coming in, a developer that comes in to develop one plot. And by a plot, I might mean 350 to 400 apartments in a tall building, won't have the knowledge of the borough that the council has, and the council needs to be geared up to provide that. And I think also there has to be recognition on the part of the council that the developer is not going to solve everything. And unfortunately, we do always come back to the question of viability. There is a need to ensure that if development is going to happen, it's going to happen where there is the opportunity for employment, that you are providing the right level of housing for middle management and upper management. You are properly integrating those communities with those that can't afford that same level of expenditure. But importantly, if you're looking to the developer to provide all of that, there has to be a recognition of viability. So in London, where you have big schemes coming forward and a contribution towards borough sill, mayoral sill, Section 106 to mitigate the impacts of your development, and then you're talking about affordable housing. There's been a call today for affordable workspace. There is recognition that you need to provide common areas in buildings to enable the community to come together. Those common areas do not generate income, and therefore they have an impact on the bottom line for a developer. And it's important to recognise in that whole viability mix, and don't just look at the developer to provide it all. There has to be information and ability and engagement coming from the local authority to bring it forward.
So, yes, a couple of questions then. Yeah.
I'm enjoying the conversation, and it's all about new build. What happens to the old? I suspect we've got about 60-70% of our housing stock is old and is going to get much older in the near future. Is that all going to be redeveloped as part of these new ideas, or are we going to embrace a input into the old Victorian structure? I think we had some expertise in exactly what that is. It's a very popular lifestyle. It's not going to change. It's there. There's great swathes of it in all these London boroughs. What is the plan for that? That is the majority. We've been talking about the minority, which is the new build.
Well, I think funny you should ask, because at the Royal College of Art in the School of Architecture, we've just received a very, very generous gift of £1 million to set up a new research lab that's looking at how we develop artificial intelligence to read interior drawings, so that we can begin to understand exactly what we have and how we might deploy it differently. So I think one of the problems is one of the last great frontiers of data, of course, and of course rightly so because of privacy concerns, is that we don't understand what's on the inside of buildings, and we don't understand really how they're functioning as a categorization and a typological series. We know that we've got this extraordinarily eccentric, almost pre-modern in parts, certainly pre-20th century building stock. We know it's valuable to us because we know that we love the texture and nostalgia of old things. But we don't know how it's performing or how we can make it more efficient, or what the consequences of the consequences of these new networks that are bringing us together in different kinds of neighbourhoods. So the consequence of power generation at different scales that's starting to develop different logics of collectivity at a neighbourhood scale. So I think it's a huge question of knowing what's there. Yeah.
I think for me the answer is it's a combination of both. So I think in terms of, if I look at Bexley, Bexley has a large scale accommodation which is pre-war, Victorian, and it has some post-war. I think some of the sites that we're looking at, the Area 3 development, the city centre, will mean demolition, reuse of land and reprovision of existing accommodation. A lot of that, the quality of some of that existing accommodation is poor, so it doesn't meet what I would call social housing standards, and that's a consideration. So I think we shouldn't be afraid to embrace that challenge of redevelopment, if I can use that terminology in this broadest form, rather than not just go in with bulldozers and start again. This is about, there are elements of social fabric and placemaking that we need to retain, but to build new conurbations and improve the quality development of the housing provision in those communities. So in order to do that, there will be a need for some redevelopment, replacement of housing stock to improve that, but that presents an opportunity about what you provide, about the quality development, the densities, the integration. So for me, that presents new opportunities of improved social well-being for the communities and placemaking and connectivity. And I think that's part of the challenge. That historically, you look at different areas across the UK, and there are some good examples of where that's happened. But typically, if it's market-led, then they're done in pockets of isolation rather than a joined-up picture. my view is that we need to have that wider joined-up picture about what does that mean for a borough or the adjoining boroughs, or that area of regeneration.
One other quick question, because we must move on to our next panel. That seems like that's it for the moment. So thank you very much, because there's a lot to think about there and a lot to watch later on the recording of the web stream. So thank you very much. Round of applause to our panel. Okay, and our final panel, Mitsui Fudosan,
Imperial
HOK.
College, we've got John and HOK. John, do you want to come and sit in the far? Daniel and yeah. And so fantastic. The last panel, which is all about the creation of knowledge hubs. So we're lucky to have John Anderson with us. Do you want to introduce yourself, John? And,
hello, I'm John Anderson. I'm Director of Financial Strategy at Imperial College. So I have a broad remit, which is to maintain financial sustainability for an academic institution which is broadly determined not to do anything that is financially sustainable.
And I'm going to just, Daniel, introduce yourself. And then.
I'm Daniel Hadger. I'm the Managing Principal for HOK in London and Europe. We've been involved in a number of knowledge clusters to date, both in terms of planning and some of the architectural work.
David.
David Height from Mitsui Fudosan. I'm the Director of Planning for the UK.
Thank you very much. So we'll start with John. So simple question. White City West, indeed Imperial West. Why now and why here? What can you explain?
I think that's a very good question. So Imperial College is a relatively young university. We're just over 100 years old. We emerged very interestingly out of the success of Albertopolis, the great exhibition. So we were able to consolidate ourselves and grow and establish ourselves in this out-of-town location called South Kensington, where we could develop with some other academic institutions called Royal College of Art and Royal School of Music, and indeed the museums. What we've seen through 2 world wars and through some interesting economic periods is that universities, knowledge institutions pretty much continue to grow. So we have a compound growth rate of about 5 to 7% virtually through all cycles. So that's increases in research volume, increases in students, and these are constrained growths as well, because we only have a 14.5 acre site in South Kensington in which to deliver our mission. That meant that by 2000, 2001, we were demonstrably full. And therefore, we found ourselves with a challenge, which is, do we completely cap growth, recognising that we were operating in 2 lowercase c conservative boroughs, Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster, that I would say were not overly supportive of everything we needed to be in a world-class university? Or did we have to find a location where we could establish a new base and really start that growth again, remove some of the constraints of that growth? And that's where White City came in. We looked at the best locations. Imperial College London, the word London is so important. We are a London institution, we're an urban institution, and actually on balance of where we could even possibly consider our growth strategy, White City was the location that came out top, and therefore we established ourselves with a significant land position here.
And can we just move on to, I think, to David Height, who's been behind a lot of the development around White City Place where we are today, and this concept of an urban knowledge hub. Why is that important, bearing in mind what Imperial's doing, and Cambridge and Oxford, they have labs out on the ring road. Why is this urban element so important for the future and for the generation now?
Well, I think it's been something that it's been sort of perceived when you look at it, other knowledge hubs that have emerged already. And particularly this is something you can see in the States, particularly sort of Boston, San Diego, San Francisco. They have shown, I think, a very, very clear trend for particularly sort of research institutions, enterprises associated with research, the research economy, if you like, wanting to move away from the sort of what used to be the tradition of being on an isolated campus, possibly on a university site, but somewhere out of town, where everything would be essentially contained and controlled within a kind of perhaps a sort of a monocultural estate. to moving into the city and having access to urban locations. And with all that, the ability to interact with partners and collaborate and have the idea of what has been called open innovation. So it's much more of an organic, cluster-based source of innovation and research. This seems to have been borne out by more successful results in terms of breakthroughs in research, the commercialization of research, and particularly the way in which all of these bodies rely on bright, young recruits, if you like, into this form of business and the form of lifestyle that they want, which is very much the urban lifestyle.
That's very interesting. And Daniel, I know, has done a lot of designing of these sorts of places for science and technology. And the Crick, for instance, can you just explain why that was a bit of a breakthrough for London in the sense of bringing people together in a new way, and why we might see more of it?
The Crick, in essence, given how it was structured and why it was structured and where it was located, has presented a tremendous opportunity for London. Science and technology and research traditionally have been relatively isolated in terms of the model of research, and as David rightfully said, typically in a university campus, not as an integrated approach to research. So when we did the design of the Crick and the location of the Crick, it was obviously located next to St. Pancras Station in order to take advantage of the Eurostar connections to Europe. It was also located near the Wellcome Trust, which was one of the sponsors of the project, UCL, and had terrific links to Cambridge and Oxford from King's Cross and other rail stations. But the challenge that we faced was getting the scientific community to believe in this notion of collective intelligence within a particular location, and the ability to spawn the incubator space, and that's almost an overused term these days, but how you create a center of excellence out of 5 institutions or 6 institutions coming together, I think is the way of the future, in order to provide a very, very strong anchor to that research and development community. Everybody looks at Silicon Valley or other locations, Boston, and wonders why these are successful. Well, they're successful primarily because you've got a tremendous core of talent. And that's one thing that the UK has in abundance, is talent. And if we can't keep the talent, you're not going to have the ability to keep that core there. And that's critical.
So Daniel, we've got a lot of talent in this city and attract a lot of international talent, but John, it's an incredibly expensive city. So what do? People want to live near where they work now. So what's Imperial's answer?
And I think it's for organisations like Imperial and indeed like the Crick, it's this extraordinary paradox, which is wherever you set up a world-class research institution, the one thing that follows is that land prices and residential prices go up way beyond the market. And therefore you actually create the problems for yourself. So when we moved to South Kensington back in the 1850s, 1860s, as I say, that was because it was the cheap part of the land and Prince Albert wasn't willing to buy in Pimlico because he thought it was overpriced. And then we come out to White City, and when we came out to White City, we bought the first site with residential values here at £450 a square foot. It was an extraordinary opportunity for us to create facilities where our community could live, work and play. But we come forward 8 extraordinary years since then, and our friends are not looking at £450 a square foot for their residential developments. Even the affordable properties no longer come in at £450 a square foot. So we've immediately created exactly the same paradox we were trying to fix by moving from South Kensington out to White City. And either you just keep repeating this and you find yourself in North Acton, then you find yourself in Hamwell, and essentially wherever transport connections put you, or you've got to actually change the dynamic somehow, and working with the local authorities, working with patient capital, and working with enlightened developers, you need to make sure that you can actually develop at the necessary scale where you have live, work and play for everybody, but that there genuinely is a facility and a provision for everybody, from the cleaners, because it's the classic story, you can't put a man on the moon without the right people cleaning the facilities that enables it to happen. You know, everybody is part of this story. And I think we feel incredibly passionate about that. We're very determined about it, but we're about one organisation. And we know that we have a brand, a balance sheet, and a land bank that allows us to make some pretty bold and pretty determined efforts around it, but it needs to be scaled up. You know, it's not just Imperial, it's UCL, it's King's, it's Queen Mary University of London, it's the universities that are actually University of West London, who I think are so important in that wider dynamic of who's getting the education and who's getting the opportunities.
But you've created more affordable units, haven't you, for your researchers, young researchers come and live here? Is that right?
Yes. So our subtle facility, the 35-storey tower, which certainly doesn't meet the density of a garden village. It's definitely achieving an urban density. And when we got the consent on that, Hammersmith and Fulham, a different version of Hammersmith and Fulham, was giving away 10% affordable consents through the dark arts. Sorry, I mean the critical issue of viability. And therefore we said, actually, we want this affordable housing for our own community, so we'll give 35%, but it's got to be facilities designed for our research staff, price for our research staff, and then obviously offset by the 65%, which is all about adding value and ideally adding to the community, but at the end of the day, it's back to that financial sustainability. So that gives us some really exciting units, and seeing how that changes the institution is going to be really exciting for me.
So, David, as a developer, if you get this right, the sense of the right mix of everything, of accommodation, of lab space, office space, co-working, does it benefit the wider area? Do you see, for instance, in Japan, I know Mitsui Fudosan has been working on similar projects outside Tokyo and with universities. Is there a ripple effect, or is it too early to say?
That has to be the aim. I mean, that has to be the ambition, and it's difficult to know, because I think every example is unique, and no given city or site is ever identical to another one. It's a very interesting debate about particularly White City that we've sort of touched on with the local political scene about this area, this site, the availability of land that John's been talking about, we're involved with here, and others are involved with to the south. This has been in many ways a bit of a void. It's available land that could be used for all sorts of different things, and it's a huge opportunity as a result to create something unique, and this is what has led to potentially what I think is going to work very well here with the collaboration, with Imperial, with ourselves, to create this kind of cluster. And yes, I mean, clearly by doing that, we are using the land for workspaces, employment spaces, and the kind of public spaces that go with it. And we're not, in contrast, creating as many residential units or affordable housing sites as could have been done under a different scenario. And it's a balance. We would like to think that form of cluster, unique cluster for this part of London, which is absolutely here because of Imperial and because of Hammersmith Hospital, and possibly because of the legacy of the BBC, these incredible foundations which we're building from, will provide the kind of range of employment and training and skills opportunities that will be unique and will hopefully have a great effect on West London. But that's something which is, again, to a large degree organic, and over a long period of time is not something we can control. So I think there's a risk. I think, John, you mentioned that there's lots of examples where the cluster starts, it seems like a great thing, but actually the result for the surrounding area is it gentrifies the whole area. And I think, was it Richard Florida who had the great theory about creative clusters, almost retracted on his whole concept recently, saying, I was wrong. This unfortunately doesn't lead to a kind of equitable approach or an equitable result, often for the areas they're in, because all the areas around it get priced up, and then it doesn't really do much for the local population. So, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this works here, and we're just at the beginning.
But also, it's interesting to think about regional UK as well. I mean, I know that, Daniel, you've been doing work with universities in Glasgow and Cardiff, effectively working on the sort of co-working and lab space in a new model. Is that going to, are you going to be able to sort of put a bit of the crick magic into those places, or is this different?
Well, I think the interesting thing, and traditionally, I suppose the clusters were always focused on a particular industry as opposed to what we're doing in Cardiff and Glasgow, which is they're really trying to blur the lines between different faculties or departments or colleges within the university. So Glasgow, for instance, in particular, they're looking at how the arts get combined with science and technology. So you're seeing a lot more benefit and a lot more integration, so much so that when we started designing the building, the client really didn't know what the labs were going to be used for, and only recently have they started defining those a lot more in terms of who they were going to be serving. So I think that's probably the direction. And just going back to David and John's points, the location here in particular, nowhere else in London do you have the Royal College of Art, the intellectual horsepower behind Imperial, the BBC, and a commercial development coming together in the way that it has. I think the one disadvantage, I suppose, if you could call it, of the Crick is the Crick is pretty much a standalone entity in an area, frankly, that nobody wanted it to begin with in that location. And all of a sudden, it's become kind of an economic driver on many levels within the King's Cross area.
Yeah. So I think another question for John. I mean, there's a sort of a fantastic coming together of internationally top quality institutions here. And great transport links, and you've seen the money coming in. But what about the connections to the wider communities? Have you got anything to say? Because that's so important that this can be an inspiration, but how does it pull in? Have you got any more thoughts on that?
Absolutely, and I think this was covered in some of the other questions from the previous panel, which is, well, institutions like Imperial College are extraordinary, but they are elitist, and they're not ashamed of that elitism. But it is supposed to be an elitism of intellect, of ability, of application, of innovation, of those issues. It's not supposed to be a finishing school for the kids that went through the right private school and then got the right A levels. And there's a real danger that we end up being that. And in many ways, operating out of South Kensington has allowed us the privilege or the entitlement of operating in a white tower, ivory tower environment. You know, when you do outreach in South Kensington, you have to go a long way before you can find that poor person. Yeah. You know, there may be some staff and some staff's kids, but you don't really have that community. Whereas White City is completely the opposite. I mean, we all know, I suspect we know the story of the 220 bus route, which starts in Fulham, where the average life expectancy is way above 80, and by the time it finishes in White City, pushing up towards Willesden, the average life expectancy has dropped by 12 years in a single borough. And so Imperial College coming to a community which is underserved, which is not getting the opportunity. I mean, very few of the kids on the estate that we're next to will ever imagine the idea of going to an Imperial College, or even going to a university. So one of our early developments in an existing building is our invention rooms. And the invention rooms is a hack space. It's a meeting space. It's an educational space where anybody can walk in, and we deliberately have programs for the kids on the estate. And it's just absolutely open access. You know, you come in, you get the benefit of understanding what a university actually does, because for many of those who weren't brought up in a privileged environment, you don't really know what a university is, and you don't understand that it's a route to a career in engineering, and a career in engineering is just the most exciting thing in the world. You get to solve problems all the time, and virtually everyone has the ability to solve problems. It's just the question is, do they have the access to the pedagogical models and the teaching environment, and at the end of the day, a piece of paper that says Imperial College 2-1, therefore I can afford to live in London. So yeah, we are really engaging with that, and it's probably actually, I mean, the bricks and the mortar, the buildings that I get to drive past on the A40 are awesome, but actually it's those kids going to those hack spaces and really understanding what a molecule is, understanding what they can make, what they can do is really the transformative issue, and something that can really make sure Imperial remains relevant and current in a London environment that has all those social change issues we've been talking about.
And David, I wanted to come back to you because I'm fascinated by cultural comparison. And I know that we were talking before today's broadcast about the differences in culture in Japan and how cities are developing and how their attitude to science and innovation. It's fascinating. Can you just tell me a bit more about that?
Well, I mean, Japan, I mean, is somewhere I spent many years working and living in, and obviously in my job now, I'm sort of trying to be a conduit between the UK and Japan with these projects, and there are some really, really interesting parallels, I suppose, between what Tokyo particularly is going through and London's going through. We, for example, in Japan are working rather sort of a similar way to White City. We're working on the edge of Tokyo on a development, Kashiwanoha, which is essentially in collaboration with Tokyo University, and it's a kind of research hub. And it's trying to open up the area to a kind of living, working community, very international. It's open particularly to overseas researchers and academics coming to Japan to spend, 6 months or a year or more working with Tokyo University on various things. And it's a sort of model of sustainable development. It's kind of been inspired very much by the effects of the tsunami and the various problems that resulted after that. So it's a lot about resilience and disaster measures and so on. And I think that there's all sorts of similar things there. What's fascinatingly different, however, about Japan and of this idea of innovation hubs is that the Japanese, have an amazing enthusiasm for the idea, but there's a very, very interesting cultural reluctance, I suppose, or inhibition to really collaborate. So, for example, we've been working on this hub in downtown Tokyo, which is a life science hub and has been going for several years now and has dozens, if not hundreds, of different pharmaceutical companies and universities signed up to it. And there's 3 buildings in central Nihonbashi, which is downtown Tokyo, with not a single wet laboratory space in it at all. Because what everyone is happy to do there is go to conferences, do things like this, till the cows come home. But the idea that a pharmaceutical company will go into a lab like the Crick, like Dan was explaining, and set up alongside several different pharmaceutical companies or institutions or universities together and share core research knowledge and ideas is a big cultural step to take because of the sort of the corporate nature of Japan and the idea that one's work and one's research is very private and important. I think at some point it will come, but it's just a very, very interesting difference that those sorts of innovation hubs are, few and far between. And I think, in the UK, the example of the Crick, the example of Imperial, and the kind of collaborations that are going on across all of these campuses is something which Japan is very, very far behind.
And I was just going to pick up with Daniel to say that you work all over the world. I know you're head of the London practice here, but does design and architecture, does it change people's thoughts and behaviour? This is a very interesting example, isn't it?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And we have a significant body of knowledge and research within the firm that has now started to test a lot of our initial design thoughts and see if what we said was going to happen actually did, and the Crick is one of them. So we're doing a post-occupancy evaluation now that they've had a couple of years to go through their cycle. So we're starting to evaluate a lot of that.
Because it's very interesting at the Crick that scientists can be peered at, can't they? And, maybe scientists don't like that.
It's almost the reverse fishbowl.
The building is designed, isn't it? And, we can go and sort of look through them. What are they doing? We probably won't understand anything, but it's fascinating, isn't it?
Well, it's quite interesting because when we first finished the building and the facility and it wasn't full, we were able to sort of go through the building anytime as long as we organized it. Now there's limited access, primarily because the researchers are being disturbed in terms of having 10 people walk through the building.
Yeah.
And you have to respect that. That's the way they work. And yet at the same time, you are seeing a significant amount more collaboration happening where it didn't happen before.
I'm thinking what Imperial's been saying. I mean, it's terribly important that ordinary people are involved in science.
Well,
get involved in the debate and have questions that might be inspired by not only peering at scientists, but maybe having chats with them as well.
The whole lower floor of the Crick is dedicated to community function. There's a community function space. There's a space for children from within the community and from within London to go in and learn about the science behind the Crick. Which is absolutely important. It is all about that spawning of the generations coming through.
Of course, the funding around these science and tech hubs is enormous. And I'm just wondering whether anyone from the audience wants to make a comment about the panel discussion and the funding and trying to create those centres of excellence around the country. Because you know, everybody's stunned by the prospect.
I mean, I think I can come to the question. I know I was talking to Daniel about this different cultural attitudes towards funding university research and the translation into commercial companies and things like that. And you were saying that there isn't really the understanding of this among the sort of institutional capital and the investors in the UK. But of course, to put an American spin on it, you know, venture capital doesn't work in the same way at all. I mean, John, do you have a view on that? Do we need to change the fund industry, the investment industry, to realise that our future may lie in just how these knowledge hubs work and how they're funded?
So I think, I mean, it's understanding the funding of deep science, and deep science is such a different sector to tech. It's such a different sector to anything else. The nature of the facilities needed to do the work, the technological risk, the market risk, the regulatory risk. If you're going to start a deep science company in life sciences, if you haven't got 100 million quid, you shouldn't start. And that's for one company, one opportunity. We've been fortunate. We have been supported actually by people like Neil Woodford. We've been supported by Peter Davis at Lansdowne. We've been supported by Mark Barnett at Invesco. They have been hugely supportive in putting very significant amounts of money to work, but they've been on their own. Who hasn't come in is the L&Gs, it's the M&Gs, it's the Avivas, it's the people with deep pockets who frankly should be in this area, because that's, you know, the long-term returns that they should be looking for and where the risk can be paid off and the illiquidity premium does pay out. But the truth is, you put this technology, you put this business case in front of a pension fund investor, and they're always going to choose the property DCF because they can understand it.
Yeah.
And therefore what we've tried to do is to, you know, funding property is hard, but it's nowhere near as hard as funding deep science ventures. So we see an opportunity, certainly in White City, where we can get co-investment, we can get joint venture support, and we can get investment in the land, in the property, in the real estate, and that allows us therefore to use our money where we have our money, our balance sheet capacity, our own partnerships, our own networks to put behind those deep science companies. But yeah, we can only push it so far. We are but one institution, and we do not have the endowments that one or two of my peers might have. Therefore, it's but it's just the scale. You know, on this campus, we've got Autolus. Autolus, in order to raise its serious money, $150 million, had to go over to the States. So they listed on NASDAQ, not on the UK market.
So what's needed to sort of change the attitudes? Will the change happen because there's a generational shift will happen because the younger generation of even fund managers, they understand data, and maybe they understand science and young companies better than the greyer peers.
Fund managers will still do PP at Oxford and won't have a clue what the data means or what the science means. They'll only pretend. But provided they are confident in that pretense, then, you know, spray and pray will make it work. And the seeds of change are already there. The amount of money that is being raised in VC funds, the amount of money that's going into deep science is increasing all the time. There is this very opportunistic and fertile moment at the moment where, in fact, you know, core fundamental investing is so misvalued that people are looking for more risk. And I think people in the US are now looking at valuations in the US and saying, well, I can get an arbitrage if I go over to Europe because those Europeans are so naive. They'll sell their businesses at a significant discount to what the American market is. So we have this window. I think we've managed to find a way of making that window unbelievably challenging by throwing in some other political issues and some issues about what it is to be Britain, etc. But I am, whilst I clearly come across as quite cynical, I am actually really quite positive at the moment. I can see more money coming into this market. I can see more opportunity coming at the end of the pipeline. But then in that 5-year window, and it's got to be patient, it's a 5-year, 7-year window, we've got to have some real successes. You've got people target unicorns, billion-dollar valuation companies. We need companies that are actually cash flow positive, employing people in sustainable locations, that actually then the pension funds go, well, you're going to pay me a divvy now, so I'll own you.
And we need to bring 7, 10, 15, 20, and they've got to come from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, UCL, Glasgow, Cardiff, Bristol. You know, the breadth of talent clusters across the UK needs to be brought together rather than just relying upon 2 or 3 to do the heavy lifting.
And what's bringing will bring the institutions together more quickly? Is it partly infrastructure connecting up the Oxford and Cambridge?
Money.
It'll be the money.
Money. Yeah, and the government, you know, we've got British Patient Capital is been launched. So the government is starting to do something behind it. And again, you know, what is the key role of the government in many of these market-led but long-term patient things? It's kind of get out of the way. You know, whenever policy money is the most expensive money in the world, because as soon as you're given policy money, you're given a rigid list of the things that you must deliver against. So you know, I look at Stratford, and Stratford is such an exciting opportunity. But when you've got LLDC, then you've got the Osborne Gift, then you've got all the other organisations that go in there, it gets harder and harder to do procurement, harder and harder to deliver a market-facing product, harder and harder to actually collaborate because everyone's working out who's liable for some report to some quango that may not even exist by the time you get to the end of it. So for me, it's, you know, government national, government regional and government local working together on an apolitical basis in order to make sure that what we know, what Daniel absolutely said, that we have this extraordinary educational foundations, research foundations and talent, and we are globally appealing to everybody, and therefore, you know, allow this complicated long-term market to operate with pretty wide freedoms, and that's very hard, I think.
That's very good. Shall we maybe just ask David to sum up on, perhaps, shall we, on the fact that I think another comment Charles Saunders-Smith made at our January forum is that public sector sometimes forgets, we all forget how competitive cities are. I mean, could you make a comment on that? What will keep London competitive, and the role of White City?
Well, I suppose, and particularly following from what John was describing, I mean, it may be interesting to consider how, as a Japanese company, we look, you know, we look at London and why we're sort of, you know, the last 2 years in particular, how that things have sort of changed or not changed the view towards London. You know, I've taken a number of repeated numbers of guests from Tokyo around. John's been very helpful showing us around Imperial as well. You know, we come over with waves and waves ever since that Brexit referendum. People wanting to come see, you know, the pall of smoke rising over London. What has happened? You know, what on earth has just where have we gone? Yeah. And it's very interesting because actually the universal conclusion, having made the visits and gone to look at Amsterdam and Dublin and Berlin and, you know, Frankfurt, is, well, actually, no, London's still kind of the only place we want to really look, and it is underpinned by, you know, going to see things like the Crick, going up to see the Sanger in Cambridge, seeing Imperial's development at White City, seeing Television Centre. You know, it's the confidence and the sort of quality of what underpins so much of what's going on in London. You know, the quality of our universities, the quality of the institutions that are based here. You know, the language, I mean, is still obviously a hugely important factor for international investment. You know, the fact that you can operate in English. You know, it may seem ridiculous, but it is inconceivably hard for Japanese businesses to look at Germany. You know, simply because of that one issue. To the extent that London is so much more easy and more attractive. So I think that the you know, the quality of the sort of the infrastructure, the quality of research and education are things that put London, you know, still very much ahead of anywhere else, as given options that we have to look at, whether it be in New York or the rest of Europe or other parts of Asia. And you know, I think that, you know, the commitment that we've made down the road at Television Centre and here, and we're here for 35 years minimum. You know, we are locked into a kind of covenant on that basis. Should, I hope, give some indication that there's an enormous amount of confidence from Japan, at least, that London is going to be, you know, really intriguing and successful. And there's many of us outside London who want to help it happen.
Thank you very much. Good.
And Daniel, the last sum up comment. Anything you want to say?
I think, you know, going back to my comment about the talent that you have within London, and, you know, being a Canadian and coming from a country which is the second largest in terms of landmass, and yet one of the smallest in terms of population, the advantage that the UK has over any other market, in my opinion, is the geographic distances are so small, relatively speaking, and you have the ability to bring those together what should be a relatively easy manner in order to create an absolute powerhouse globally for research and development. And what we really need to do is crack that nub and figure out how to do it here, because it is doable. The US has done it across an entire continent. You know, this is relatively small landmass in order to do it with, and that is going to be the key, I believe, to the sector here in the UK.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I mean, again, a wonderful panel and so much to reflect on. Unless there are any questions, we're probably going to end the event and the web stream now. Any burning questions out there? There's just so much to think about, isn't it, that you just get swamped. But fortunately, you can watch it again. And after this event is finished, we're going to record some individual interviews that we're going to put up on the blog, take the story a bit further. So thank you very much. Round of applause.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. It's lovely.